Hey guys, it's Associate Pastor Simon Nielsen here from Music of Life Church Appleton. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing uh, Head Pastor Joel Swakowski of Music of Life Church Kimberly and Senior Pastor Jonathan Freese of Music of Life Church Appleton. So thanks for being here today, guys. I appreciate it. I see you.
Got my eye on you.
Yeah. But today I want to talk about the depression episode that you guys recorded and did for season 2 of What the Flock. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And one of the first questions I wanted to ask was, depression is obviously a major issue, inside the church, but also outside the church. You hear people, talking about the fact that they have anxiety. That's something you hear often nowadays. Anxiety, depression, to the point where it's you can almost assume somebody is on or has been on medication for something or is self-medicating for one of these things, it seems like. So I wanted to ask, why did it take so long for you guys to get to this topic?
Well, I think one of the things we're learning more and more as we strategize and record the episodes that we're covering is, in order to get to some of these really important topics, there's a right way to get there. A lot of our episodes are building on one another. And in order to get to this depression episode, we really had to uncover a lot of the underlying issues of depression so that when we record the episode, it can be done in a way where it's still only a 30 to 40 minute episode that you're listening to. So if it's similar to the God's Nature series, where it took 6 episodes to get through that because of all the groundwork we had to lay in order for us to actually give the answer. It was either do 6 episodes in order to get to the answer, or it was do 1 6-hour episode. And it's like, no, that there's way too much information to uncover to actually land this point. And really, although depression is a standalone topic and episode, it's not part of any mini series. You could look at it as episode 7 of the God's Nature series, because so much of what we're uncovering in those first 6 episodes of season 2 is laying the groundwork for us to be able to land this big hammer point of how depression is such an issue in the church, and really how the leaders in the church are actually enabling this to be a bigger issue. So that's really why it took so long. It's like if you listen to the episodes before the depression episode, we are talking about depression and a lot of the implications and the consequences of what we're teaching. We're saying if these things are understood or taught wrong, or if these contradictions are embraced and not resolved, it could result and will result in depression. We had to so although depression wasn't really the main focus of an episode until episode 7, we did talk about it throughout a lot of the other episodes. But that's really what we're doing, is we're seeing, and as we continue forward in the future seasons, it's been really interesting to see how much, as we continue to move forward, we keep referring back to previous episodes that if we hadn't recorded these podcast seasons would not be nearly as effective as what I believe they are.
Gotcha. Pastor Jonathan?
Pastor Joel's answer is pretty spectacular. I will just add that really, in order to be able to talk about depression, like Pastor Joel said, we need to lay the foundation for who God is in his nature. Like if you look at a lot of, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, a lot of the first step in people's program is identifying a higher power. And so we see that as, like, I think that we would agree that that is the first step in someone overcoming any sort of addiction. And in terms of depression, that's a lot of what happens is
Hmm.
people are depressed and then they take medication or they medicate themselves to overcome that depression. And I think that these programs have figured out through experience that this is usually the first contradiction that someone has is,
Yeah.
how did I get here? Is there someone that created me? Is there a first cause because I didn't make myself? And that's very settling. That's very settling for people in these programs, just to name it. So I think that it is absolutely essential to have that foundation, just like Pastor Joel was saying, to overcome and have an answer for depression.
Yeah, it's such a, I mean, the issue with depression is it's feelings, right? We're feeling a certain way. We're feeling this just sucking of our energy. And it's important for us to recognize the cause of that isn't something feels wrong. Something feels wrong because there's contradictions in my thought process. And something we're still talking about as we're currently working on season 3 is these God's nature episodes. And one of the things that we are consistently bringing up is this idea that when it comes to forming your worldview, the first thing that needs to be addressed, or maybe the most important thing that needs to be addressed, is God's existence. Whether I'm a believer in God or an atheist, that is the cornerstone of my belief in how the world works and what the world and why we're here. So you can't get away from it. And if there's a contradiction in that cornerstone belief, it's a really big area that forms everything the way we look at. And that huge contradiction is really what's going to end up resulting in a person having depression.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that when we're filming these episodes, and why it takes so long to get here as well, is to show that we're going to put some time into the the topics get juicier as time goes on.
Yeah.
I'll just to give you a hint about in the future, it's like the topics are going to be hitting home harder the later that we are, the further we go in the podcast. So it's really important to show and have these foundational episodes to show, hey, listen, we're going to care for, each of these topics. And we have an answer for each of these topics that are seemingly not that big of an issue, like smoking or swearing or drinking,
Right.
whatever.
That was like all season 1 stuff, right?
A lot of that. Yeah.
Cool. Man, what an answer. What a nice, exhaustive answer for that first question. Had it come from 2 other men, I would have taken it as a little defensive. But no, that's great. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, you had to build the foundation to get there. Otherwise, it wasn't going to make sense. So
Right.
one of the things I feel like I just heard you say, or like one of the main points of all of that, was that having some understanding just for what your belief is about God, and not even necessarily who he is, but just the existence of a God. I have a friend that when he argues about God's existence, it's, is there a first cause, and what do you believe? And after that, you can talk about God's identity.
Right.
But everybody believes that there's a first cause, whether it's the Big Bang or whatever. And
Yeah.
just being able to be aware of that, state that, I think is so healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But the other point I feel like I took from that is, shouldn't the church be the most helpful with this, if this is one of the things that is the foundation of setting up a good, healthy thought process, is helping people identify their belief about God? So I guess, why do you think, I can jump down to one of my questions, because that's basically what it is. It's like, why do you think churches aren't seen as the place to go to help fix this right now?
because the church isn't helping people with this. I think, unfortunately, we should be, the church in general should be the place for people to be able to go with a depression issue and it be cured.
Okay.
Which really the implication then is the church is the guiltiest community on earth. Because not only have we failed miserably at this, it's our job to be able to help people with this. And largely, we pass off the responsibility of helping people with this, essentially blaming God for it. So why is the church failing so bad at this? The church, I think, largely it's due to the fact that instead of the church having its impact on the world, the opposite's true. The church is becoming more like the world over time. So what you see is the answers the church is giving are no better than the answers the world's giving. And in a lot of areas, it's worse because it's contradicting itself, where a lot of times the world will give answers and at least maybe say, you know what, we don't know the answer to how to fix depression. So we just medicate you. We'll just try to make it as good as we can. Where the church will take that same approach, but also say, but you know what, you can't know the answer, or there is no answer. And it's just something you have to deal with because of your sin nature, which again is essentially blaming God for the problems we have. So that's where I think ultimately the world has had a greater impact on the church, a bigger influence on the church than the church has had on the world. And that's why we see the church over time become less and less helpful to people.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest people, I would say, that the world has had an influence over are pastors. Pastors aren't helping their church with depression because they're depressed. It's just they don't have an answer. So they got to get up there on Sunday or in front of their church or whatever and come up with some sort of answer for why it's okay that they're depressed and still leading people.
Yeah.
And then it just massacres the whole church.
Yeah.
It's really sad. But I think that's what pastors, you know, I'm curious to know the statistic of how many pastors are depressed, because I know that there's not a whole lot of longevity in ministry. As soon as you start leading people and you have contradictions in the way that you lead, man, it just piles up. And that's why we're seeing pastors depressed. And that's why we're seeing a lot of suicide rates go through the roof in the church. Because I think the church is, like what Pastor Joel said, is supposed to have the answer for that. So it feels like doubly hopeless.
Yeah.
If someone's depressed.
More guilty.
Bingo.
Maybe even guiltiest. Which would ultimately we'd have the tendency to become more depressed. Because not only do we not have the answer, we're supposed to, and we rationalize it away as if it's God's fault.
Yeah.
Where the world doesn't have those issues. The world just doesn't have the answer. But they're not guilty for not having the answer because it's not their job to have the answer.
Right.
So you probably, if I was to guess what a lot of the statistics would be, is that the church isn't any better than the world in these areas of mental health issues and suicidal tendencies or actual suicide rates. If I was to guess, because of the cause of suicide or of depression and what we're uncovering and learning about through these podcast episodes, the church may even have higher rating in all this because of the guilt that comes with the hypocrisy that comes with supposing to have the answer, but telling people they can't, and then blaming God.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think right towards the start of the episode, you guys talk about is, you know, the thing that's going to lead to depression the quickest is trying to live out contradictions. And And I feel like what you're already saying this, but yeah, the second you become a leader in a church and a pastor, and so now it's you are the place that's supposed to have the answer for people with whatever they're dealing with in life, but in this case, depression. And the more, you stand up every Sunday and give limitations to people on their lives and try to lead these people, it's everything's coming back twice as hard at you than if you were just, you know, Joe Schmo going about his day, living his life. It's like you're now responsible for these people. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense how it could actually be higher in the church. I yeah. Um, One of the things, and I'll just share quick, is when I was growing up, going to church, I basically did exactly that. Like I was presented with so many doctrines that you guys have talked about in What the Flock, and that's why I'm such a big fan of this podcast. And I really do feel and believe it can help so many people inside the church and even outside the church have a healthier view of what church and is supposed to be and who God is. But because when I was going to church when I was younger, a teenager in my early 20s, um, I was trying to make myself believe in these things I was being taught that didn't make sense. And so thankfully, this podcast is around to make sense of those things. But I ended up on depression medication because I was telling myself these lies and trying to believe these things that sounded good on paper. Everything that people are saying in these churches sounds amazing on paper. It makes you feel good in the moment. Their intentions, I believe, are very good. They want to help people,
Yep.
but it doesn't happen because they don't have these non-contradictory definitions and things like that. So luckily, I was able to get off depression medication and things. But so that brings me to another question I kind of had, which was, and I think you touched on this already, Joel. You kind of said it under the table here, but do you think it would be more healthy or less healthy for somebody um, to go to church and try to do that, try to make themselves go along with something that doesn't make sense? I'm not saying every church, I'm just saying if you're going to a church and you have that feeling of, man, this doesn't make sense, but I'm supposed to believe this, would that person be better off just not going to church at all?
Yes. So that this is one of those topics we get to every once in a while where it's like, oh, this is where we start getting in trouble.
Well, I'm the guy for that.
But give me a minute to explain what we mean by this, because
Yeah.
I mean, I've actually had an interaction with some old high school friends of mine who were dealing with maybe coming back to the church and wanting to know what's the right step to take. And both of them that I was interacting with have a lot of either church damage or man-made tradition in the place of God, which really is another form of church damage, right? And the one friend I was talking to was actually saying to me how she's really, like, in the day or two before I was actually able to meet with them, she was reading the Bible and like trying to do all this work of like, I don't know, being able to hang out with me. Like she had to do some homework first. And I actually said to her, I'm like, as a pastor, this is really hard for me to say, but my first step for you wouldn't be for you to just start reading the Bible. It's like, and I'm like, maybe don't tell anybody that a pastor from Music Life Church Kimberly, the senior pastor, said don't read your Bible yet. But my point is like, you're not going to do you're not helping yourself at all when you approach this, even the Bible, with all this damage. That's where all the words that she's going to read are going to be filtered through all this man-made tradition and all this church damage she has. So my words to her was, the first thing I would do is find a church you can go and visit, experience this community of people, and start being loved by a group of people, and a group of people that you can open up to and be challenged by. But this also reminds, so not only that, but this, so this reminds me of every episode we do, we talk about 3 different categories of people as it relates to how they've experienced whatever the topic is we're covering for that episode.
Right.
And it's the second category of people, the people we understand why they do what they do. That is really the heart of what your question is for me. Where we're not saying this group of people are people we think that what they're doing is the best option, but we also understand why the decisions they're making are the decisions they're making. And in fact, what it tends to be is the people who recognize this church, and again, I'm not saying every church, but this person's church experience has been negative. They've been experiencing a church where they aren't getting answers. And even worse, the answers they are getting are causing more damage and resulting in more depression. So those people who leave church because they know it's better for me to not go to church than it is for me to go to church and experience abuse. Yes, the decision for these people to not go to church is a more healthy decision than it is for them to just go to church because, you know what, going to church is the right decision in all cases. It's like, no, it isn't. Not if the church you're going to is teaching man's tradition in the place of the word of God. Not if the church you're going to is telling you to do a bunch of things, but not giving you the reason behind it, not explaining, the value in doing these things. So yeah, it's a tough question to answer. I feel very confident in my answer, but I also know these are the types of things me and Pastor Jonathan are sharing, that we know that we could get a lot of pushback in these areas, because I think a lot of Christians think, you know what, reading your Bible and going to church every week are 2 things that are always good. But it's not. They're not always good.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how and why I'm doing it.
Right.
And yeah, so great question. Great question, Pastor Simon.
Yeah. And what I'll add is people leaving church because they're being abused. We see it the same way as a marriage, someone leaving an abusive relationship. The ideal situation, I think, is if someone has a conversation with someone that they trust within the church before they leave, to try to have a conversation with someone, because people can feel massively guilty leaving an abusive situation. I think it's really helpful to at least have a conversation with someone that you trust before making that decision. Like, I know that Pastor Joel and we would love to be able to sit down and have a conversation with someone, if they felt hurt before they leave. I think we would want that. We would want that opportunity. So if that's at all possible, that's what I would encourage people to do, is to talk to someone that you trust. If there is someone in leadership that you can talk to before you leave, because we don't want to just see people feeling uncomfortable. I feel like I'm being abused, and then leave.
Right.
So we want people to basically go, okay, this is the way that I feel. Now share that with someone who's potentially a leader, someone that you trust within the church, and see what they have to say, see if they're going to help you. And I know, and we've done this, we've helped people, leave their churches the right way, in a way that actually helps everyone in the situation feel settled. And the other person, and the person that's leaving, doesn't feel guilty because they have a place to go to. There's a church to go to. There's a community to go towards. And if anyone doesn't have that, who's listening out there, like we want to be those people. And so if there's no one that you can talk to, if you're in an abusive church, if you feel like you're being attacked within your church, it is okay to leave. But that's why we end every podcast by saying we're here for you.
Right.
Like we want to help you and shepherd you into a community that's going to care for you, a community that's safe. And we don't think that anyone's supposed to walk out their salvation alone. That would be terrible. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I would like to add to this leaving a church because it's being abusive is a good step to take, but it's never the end solution to this either. Right. So although I do say, yes, it would be better for you to leave a church that's hurting you than it is to just stay there for the sake of going to church.
Yes.
The solution is never to say I'm done with church, though. Like, period. Because and this is where you want to go back to the analogy Pastor Jonathan just brought up of seeing it like a spousal relationship. Just because I'm in a marriage and I'm experiencing abuse from my spouse doesn't mean that I look at the sanctity of marriage as it's at fault. It's not marriage that's at fault. It's the marriage I was in. And I would want people in church to recognize that too, and this is, I think, happens a lot, is God gets blamed. We see this happen in the world a lot. Christians are idiots. They believe a bunch of contradictions and it's God's fault and the church's fault. And it's like, no, it's man's fault. The church, when it's abusing people, is doing so because it's not operating the way God intended. So it's never God's fault when people are being hurt. So that's where it's like, yes, it's okay for me to leave a church, but that doesn't mean, to Pastor Jonathan's point again, that now I'm on a journey of working out and walking out my salvation isolated.
Yeah.
The church is still needed in people's lives in order for them to experience salvation and sanctification, and in this amazing life that God does intend for us to live is never meant to be lived alone.
Right.
And I can, again, just to share on myself, that was my strategy. That's what I did. And I wasn't on depression medication while I was attending church, but I experienced enough of these things where I was like, this isn't helping me. And I left because I didn't want to feel like I was lying to myself all the time. So I did that. I just walked away and I left, and I didn't go somewhere else. And all that left me with was, well, what do I think is going to work? What's my plan for being happy? And when that ran down and all the boxes I had of things I thought were going to make me happy got checked, that's when I really hit bottom, because now God couldn't help me. And ultimately everything I was doing wasn't making me happy either. So then where do you go? And, yeah, so I think that's such a huge point. I appreciate you saying that. And then one of the things you said, Pastor Jonathan, was that, go to your pastors, go to a leader, go to someone you can trust if you can. And hopefully, and I think you shared this on yourself, that this has happened. Hopefully those people are willing to hear you. And if they're doing something wrong, or if we're doing something wrong at one of our churches, and this is something you touched on in the podcast, it's that humility. It's hopefully we're going to change. And I think that's ultimately what's keeping people depressed. And it's like, how bad does everything in your life have to get, whether you're a pastor, a leader in a church, or a member? It's how bad does everything have to get before you're willing to consider, maybe I'm wrong? Because when we say you have a contradiction, that's really what we're saying. There's something in your life that you're holding tight to that, unconsciously, does not make any sense. And that's unsettling. And so, Pastor Joel, you talked about, that unsettling feeling is actually a good thing, when we feel unsettled
Yeah.
and we are, we feel that feeling of depression where we're getting drained of energy, it's supposed to get our attention. And if we're humble enough, we can
Yeah.
go, where am I off? Because when we have that feeling, that's the first thing we should be going to. But you have to be humble to do that. So
Yeah.
I got one or two more questions here, and we can wrap up. But one of the things with that humility, like I wanted to speak for just a second to like not just the church, but outside of the church, because this podcast is meant to help people who've been hurt by church. And I think whether people have gone to church before or not, I think it's still possible that you have, quote unquote, church damage because of what you've seen from outside, where it's like, why would I ever go there? Those people are just as unhappy, if not more so than I am. So, but yet outside of church, like I said, we're seeing all these people with anxiety, the anxiety issues, depression issues, like that's still rampant. So obviously there's not, a crystal clear answer outside of the church. So I was just wondering, how do you see outside of the church depression being played out or things that might be causing depression?
Well, I think the causes are going to be the same. Ultimately, and we get deep into this in the episode, it's contradictions, and especially contradictions in deeply held beliefs. The deeper the belief, the more impact that contradiction is going to have on my thought process, and lower, because really the way God created our brains is he's looking out for us.
Right.
The bigger the area, the more we're going to be depressed and lose and sacked of our energy, because God's like, no, this is a really important topic you need to figure out, Joel. So the causes are going to be the same, but the way I see the world playing out, honestly, at this point, there is this process you have to go through in order for me to overcome my depression. And the first thing is just really becoming aware I have depression, right? And then the second step would be like, why am I depressed? And then there is this process we have to go through before we're going to finally overcome it and be cured of it, or for that issue to be dissolved. What I see the world doing that I think is actually a step ahead of the church at this point in our culture is that first step of awareness. The world seems a step ahead of the church in, because what I see in the world is this effort to destigmatize mental health issues.
Right.
Yep.
Which is great as a first step, because what we're really seeing is we all know we have mental health issues. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Let's start talking about it. Let's bring in awareness to these issues. Now, that's the first step. Where I think the world falls short is that's essentially become their solution too. If we just talk about it and admit that it's an issue, and then it's basically that is supplemented with this idea of, and just deal with it.
Right.
There it is. Yep.
That's an issue. But at least that first step of awareness is something we all need to do. And it's something I still see the church avoiding, because I think there's this, there is this unconscious belief. There is this intrinsic feeling within us in the church that knows we're not supposed to be dealing with this. So if I admit it, then I have to your point, Pastor Simon, I'm essentially admitting that I'm wrong. And I'm not as much of a Christian as I think I should be. I think the church could take a cue from the world in this. Let's destigmatize this. Let's start talking about it. Let's admit it. And I'm not saying that, I know there are churches that are doing this, but overall, I see Christians a step behind the world in this. Let's just at least start talking about it.
Yeah. And that's one of those where it is like exactly what you said, where it's like, let's destigmatize it. Let's all, it's okay. It's okay to have these problems. Yeah. And you see that happening a lot now, which is great. But then I feel like the solution becomes we should just be able to talk about it so that when you're not in a good place, you can feel safe enough to just talk with somebody, and which that's amazing too. But it's not this next step of going through this process like you talked about, Pastor Joel.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're all safe enough to talk about it. Sometimes we all get sad,
Yeah.
and we should be there for each other when we do, but it's not like, well, how do I completely dissolve and get rid of this issue in my life?
Right.
And so, yeah, I agree. Pastor Jonathan, did you have anything to add to that? Or
I just wanted to say that I feel like the best strategy that's out there is just to deal with it. Like what Pastor Joel said, it deal with it. Like outside the world, like you're gonna have this issue, and it's nothing that you're gonna be cured of,
yeah,
or really fix. You're just gonna need to deal with it. And whenever the church does that breaks my heart.
Right.
Where the church, so the world is like, okay, we're gonna help you deal with it. We should destigmatize it. We should, be able to talk about it. So therefore, the church should also do that. The church should also destigmatize it, be able to talk about it, be able to share. We all feel sad. And then do one step more, which is it's our responsibility to help people fix their depression. If I'm depressed, I need to get help from someone who can help me with my depression. And when I say help me, I mean fix it. Something's wrong. It's broken.
Yeah.
Like when we were children, we were not depressed because we weren't lying. We weren't trying to deceive. We did something wrong, and our parents would say, "Did you steal from the cookie jar?" And we
Yeah, I did.
and then it was and then they're like, okay, well then you're gonna be punished. You need to sit in the corner and think about what you did. We sit in the corner, we think about what we did, we serve our time, and then we go forward.
Right.
And then it's like, ta-da, fixed. Yeah. It's like you did something wrong. What are you gonna do to make up for it? Or you have a contradiction. Let's resolve it. Now live your life. And so the world doesn't have a cure. The church has a cure because God is showing us in his word how to cure it.
Yeah, he is.
And now he's going, I did my step. Now there's people, now the church needs to do it.
Mm-hmm.
He is not at fault for anyone having depression. He's given us all the answers that we need, but there needs to be people who apply it, who do what the world do, and then one step beyond,
And I'll just pitch season 3 real quick. There is an episode we talk about laborers, so stay tuned for that, because not only will it connect right to this depression episode, but it actually talks about the people and the role in which is meant to uncover and dissolve this issue of depression. It is right there, something Jesus teaches. So stay tuned. It's so good.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, when you were sharing what?
I don't know. I whatever it is that you're about to say, I think I'm gonna like.
Whatever Simon's laughing about.
That's just my vibe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, go on.
No, when you were sharing about that, you don't like really, really young kids. Not that kids or teenagers don't have depression, because that's a huge issue. But
Totally.
when we're 5 years old,
Yeah.
we make a cookie, and we get confronted about it, and our immediate response is, yeah, I did it. But there's a comedian that I know that has a joke where he talks about, do you remember the first time you told a lie and it worked? Like, and he's talking about being a little kid like that. And he might even use the cookie jar example, and how your entire world just changed. Like, this was an option. I could have been doing this. So when I hear you say that, I just go, oh, that's where depression starts.
It is. Yeah, man.
We're
That's
like,
awesome.
we can lie to ourselves and we can
Yep.
lie to other people and we think we're getting away with something.
Oh,
And
that's
eventually
it
we're
right
not.
there.
But yeah, one of the things, like when I thought like this question, that I asked you about, how do you see this in the world going on? I feel like it's getting more and more apparent why people in the world are getting like this depression issue everywhere just keeps ramping up, it seems like. And I think part of it's because we're talking about it more and it's being destigmatized. But I think things like I'll just say like cancel culture, all these things where people are getting more and more prone to try to get, feel good at the expense of pointing out where somebody else is wrong and trying to bring that person down a peg. Not that we shouldn't be aware when people are wrong, but it's how do we respond to that? Because on that internal level, that unconscious level, we all know when we point out something wrong in somebody, there's four more fingers pointing back at
Yeah,
you.
for real. Seriously, everybody should be canceled. If I'm
Right.
canceling any one person,
Yeah,
everyone should be canceled. Because
right.
we've
And
all done things wrong.
Oh yeah, and I want to jump in. I want to talk about cancel culture
Yes,
too.
yes.
If your solution to fixing a problem is to cancel someone, then the next time you do something wrong, you should be canceled.
right.
That's it.
Contradiction.
Yeah, then let's just resolve it. If you want to be a canceler, then let everyone do that to you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not on TV. Well, what would you consider canceling? Like your outlet to the world, like your way of communicating? We're going to take away your cell phone.
Yeah.
We're going to take away you don't deserve the internet anymore.
Twitter's gone. Yeah.
Twitter's
Yeah.
gone. You get no
No Twitter.
tweeties, no tweets, no
No
birds, no birds anymore.
No birds for you.
Yeah.
No birds.
Wow, you struck a chord with the cancel culture question there, Simon. We didn't even let you ask a question yet.
Yeah. But that's
huge.
what that means. So if you
Yeah.
want to, but the second someone cancels someone, so this is just a great example of having a contradiction.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I do something wrong, it gets exposed, and I get canceled. Okay, whatever that is. Like, I'm no longer allowed to be a pastor. Whoever facilitated that is saying that's the solution to address issues in their life if they're pushing for that.
Right.
So the next time they do something wrong, then they either need to say, I should be canceled, or they need to say that was wrong to cancel that person, or else we're going to watch them get depressed.
Yep.
Right. And I think, yeah, thanks. That's everything. I just wanted to touch on that because I do think it is something that bothers me, but it bothers me because it's becoming it's so ingrained in our culture, and it's just extrapolating that mentality of like, I can judge you, I can say you're wrong for something, when I know I have these issues in my life too, whether it's that same exact issue or something else, but it's treat others how you want to be treated. And we all know that unconsciously. And so, yeah, when we try to push for somebody losing their job or getting fired or getting thrown out of a school or whatever it's like, well, unconsciously, you've either done something worthy of that yourself, or you're not perfect and you're going to do something like that in the future. And now you're living your whole life in fear. And the only way to keep up that illusion, and again, it's the being able to be humble and admit you're wrong, because otherwise the only way to keep that up is to do it more and more and more until things eventually get bad enough. So yeah, thanks. I feel like we could talk about that one for a while. So
Oh, baby, that was awesome. Yeah, man,
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
I guess in conclusion, I just want to give somewhere for people to go. A lot of the times talks like this end with, and here's a phone number you can call to talk to somebody, which is great, but it's a step. And I think if you take one step to try to get better, you're going to feel some relief from your depression. So that's awesome. But for Music of Life Church, for both of your churches, can you just tell people, if somebody walked into your church and said, I'm here because I feel like I've been depressed for a long time and I feel like I should be able to come somewhere to get help, what do your churches do? What's your process, or how would you handle somebody like that to actually help them?
I would want to advertise the restoration process we have, because that's going to be the cure all for all these mental health issues because of what we're teaching. But ultimately, it's like, yeah, please reach out to someone, reach out to us if you don't have anybody. And if you came, that's what we do. That Music Life Church is trying to get people in the restoration process. I really look up to people who ask for help. And it's something I still strive to do on a daily basis, is reach out and ask for help. Even if I don't think I need it, it is so healthy to reach out and ask someone for help. So
Right.
yeah, please come, and we'd love to teach you some things and give you some tips on what you can do to walk a healthy life.
Cool.
Yeah, and people can come to drop us a line on go to our websites and like and contact us personally. Like there's an email link that Pastor Joel and I do not have secretaries. So
Yeah, we don't.
If you send us an email, that's going to go directly into my email account. No one else will see that. So if people are like, oh, I don't really want a secretary or anyone else reading it, don't worry about that, everyone. We don't have secretaries.
Right.
But if they did come in, it's just like that absolutely. We have processes and things set up, and we want to be able to talk to people and understand what's going on in their life. Like, if someone doesn't feel heard or doesn't feel safe enough to share what's going, then let's talk. Let's schedule some time. We will find someone for anyone to sit down and talk with if they're sad. Like okay, just backing up here, I have to say this. You were saying, Simon, when you left the church, how that wasn't the answer, because what it does is it makes you are now completely responsible, and there is no one else to help you with your issue. So you feel all of the pressure and all of the weight of all of your decisions, and you have no help, and it just crushed you.
Right.
That crushing is good because it helped you break in the end. However, all that Pastor Joel and I are trying to do is say the question that you said, which is, how bad does it have to get to ask for help? Where we would love to facilitate people in helping them not be depressed anymore, to cure their depression. What we're saying is, we want to have some responsibility in your health. As pastors, we want to take on some of that responsibility, which sounds crazy, but that's what we want. We want to see people get help. So that means if people come to my church, they come to our church, they say, I want help. They say they want to be a part of it. Whatever what they're saying is essentially, Pastor Jonathan, I want to make you somewhat responsible for my health. And I accept.
Yeah. We'll bear that with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, so Pastor Joel, you talked about this restoration program, and, that's something that I know our churches offer towards people. And when I talk about this on Sundays, when I'm doing announcements at Music Life Church Appleton, every Sunday I tell people there's this program available. And when people come up to ask me, hey, what is that about? Or I'd like to get started in that, A, I'm going to ask them why, but then B, when they ask me what the benefit is, what does it actually do? One of the biggest things I say is, I can tell you what it did for me. And for me, and this, I'm speaking to when I was depressed, because the restoration program is the thing that got me off of depression medications.
Awesome.
Everything that that program covers, that I was helped with by friends and people in the church, is why I'm off of depression meds. And the biggest thing that helped me, and the biggest thing I hope it does for anybody who goes through it, is that you just come out of it knowing more of what you believe and why. And hopefully you're humble enough to, if there's something you do believe currently and you recognize that it's wrong, that you're willing to change that, which is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's so many people walking around that they feel like they know what they believe about the most important things in life. Why are we here? Who am I? What's my purpose? Who is God? What is God? Like, what does love actually mean? We all feel like we know what we think and believe about that. But when you ask people to actually tell you, it can be really difficult for a lot of people. And like we spoke about at the start of this, just knowing what you believe and why and how you're living that out in your life is one of the quickest ways to start bridging those gaps and those disconnections you have and become more whole. And that's really what we're talking about. We want people to be more whole. We want people to be that 5-year-old who owns up to taking a cookie out of the cookie jar. That's what that restoration program is supposed to do, is
Yeah.
help you be somebody that can admit when they're wrong and embraces that as a good thing. So you can be more healthy, more right, and not be depressed. And not being depressed is an effect of all of those things.
Right.
So
Yep.
yeah, thank you guys for your time. Thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you offer people through your churches and through this podcast. This podcast is amazing because people, if you don't want to come to church, you're not there yet, or you don't live in Wisconsin or whatever, this podcast is giving you the bread and butter of everything we talk about and have to offer. So thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it. And I will see you later.
Yeah. Thank you, Pastor.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Pastor Simon.